Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final panel of today, Human-Machine Integrated Formation.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of Army Futures Command, welcome to this Warrior Corner on Human-Machine Integrated Formations. And I did just want to say a thank you. I know we are the last thing between everyone here and some happy hour events. So really appreciate the large crowd and the support. I am joined today on this panel that represents the larger team driving the integration of robots and formations. My name is Colonel Kevin Bradley. I'm the director of the Next Generation Combat Vehicles Cross-Functional Team. And joining me on this panel is Brigadier General Phil Kinnery, the 62nd Infantry Commandant, Brigadier General Chad Chalfant, the 55th Armor Commandant, Colonel Scott Shaw, the Director of Maneuver Capabilities Development and Integration Directorate at Fort Moore, Colonel Ken Bernier, Program Manager, Future Battle Platforms, and Mr. Rob Monto, the Director of Advanced Capabilities and Concepts Technology for Army Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technologies Office, RICTO. Gentlemen, thank you for being a part of this panel and for your leadership in this area. So if we can go to the first slide. So before we jump off into questions for the panel, I wanted to first talk about where we are in the robotics effort. So when you look at historical examples, as you've often heard over the last 2 days, the period between World War I and World War II holds many parallels to where we see ourselves today. And the debate at that time, coming out of World War I into World War II, was about how to mechanize formations. And whereas the debate today that we're currently going through is how and where to optimize humans with machines. And when you look at the first kind of tanks developed, specifically the Renault tank after World War I was really where we started to test and build that capability. The critiques of the time of the Renault was that it was too slow, it broke down a lot and it wasn't reliable. And then there was a lot of debate about whether and how to integrate it into formation and what its role was going to be. And when you look at some of the prototypes in our initial unmanned ground vehicles, a lot of those same critiques follow through into the robots, right? That they're where we see them in the formation, how rugged they are, and whether or not they can keep up and fight with a BCT or an IBCT. So just as the airplane, the radio, and the tank were critical to unlocking maneuver in World War II, we see HMIF, the combination of robots, autonomy, and then their ability to reduce risk or offset risk is really the key to unlocking expanded maneuver in a transparent battlefield with the characteristics that you see at the top of the slide. And I think informative of that, as we look at the time period between World War I and World War II, the critical piece that's been important to us is that from the Renault to tanks we fought with in World War II, there were 51 light tank variants and 38 medium to heavy variants. And as we look at tackling the challenges of a transparent battlefield, that same rapid development in hardware, software, and technology is really going to be the key to offsetting risk and overcoming some of those challenges. And the last thing that I'll say is this effort, when it comes to human-machine integrated formations, covers all three of the time periods in continuous transformation. So where are we going? So next slide, please. So the Secretary of the Army, the Chief, and General Rainey have all been very clear on the problem that they have asked us to solve is no blood for first contact. And when you've heard us talk in the past about robots in different venues, we've talked about the 3Ds or expanded that out to the 8Ds when we're talking about what robots can do. But really, when you take a look at it from the formation perspective, it comes down to that second sentence on this slide, is how do HMIF platoons make infantry and armor companies better able to shoot, move, communicate, and survive on a transparent battlefield. And so to kind of talk about our efforts in this space, we're going to begin with a couple of questions to the panel. and then after that, I'll open it up to questions from the audience. So our first question is going to be for the two commandants, and we'll begin with the Armor Commandant. How does the value of HMI translate into infantry and armor formations?
So thanks for the question, and I'll start off with Kevin's outline in the interwar period and starting World War I, this progression of capability development that occurred with tanks some years ago. And I think that as we think about how we're going to integrate these human-machine integrated formations and integrate this capability into our armor formations, the ABCT, I think we got to be pretty clear-eyed about what we want them to do. Our senior leaders, General Rainey talks about we don't want to trade blood for first contact. And what we're driving towards is greater tactical specificity in terms of what we want these robots to do. And that specificity has to be informed by being pretty clear-eyed about what the technology actually allows them to do. So that's my preamble for kind of a two-step tactical progression of what we want robots to do. The first thing is Overwatch. Overwatch is a fairly simple tactic to explain, very hard and dangerous to do in the real world. Overwatch is about moving to a position of advantage, getting observation, being able to orient, decide, and act, and perhaps provide some covering fire for another element. And so Overwatch is the tactical task that we're starting off in terms of tactical development. And that will be followed by a second tactical task, which is more complex, more dangerous, and that's achieving suppression. And when we talk about suppression as a tactical task, it's not just direct fire suppression. We're talking about suppressing in multiple domains, whether that's suppressing using electronic attack methods, whether that's suppressing the enemy's ability to strike me with UAS systems, suppression with perhaps indirect fire and loitering munitions. And so to summarize this, as we think about how we want to integrate robots into our armored formations, it's about a tactical task progression. Start with Overwatch, move on to suppression, and then we can talk about other capabilities down the line. But that specificity, I think, will drive industry and our government to develop these capabilities for more lethality.
Sir, thank you. General Kinnery.
Yeah, so I think I'll, not to simplify the formation, but I'm focused on the infantry squad. I'm focused on the movement to contact. I'm focused on the search and attack and the approach march. I want to be able to take that infantry squad. I want to maximize the cognitive and physical capabilities of that squad by putting that burden on the robot. I want to be able to increase the depth and duration by which an infantry squad can maintain contact with the enemy, so that that infantry squad leader can bring everything that they have to bear as a system and overwhelm the enemy. So everything that that Chad has brought up already, that's kind of what we're looking at inside the infantry house.
Gentlemen, thank you. For our second question, I'm going to go down to Mr. Rob Monteau. Could you explain the role of RICTO in developing human-machine integrated formations?
Good, sir. Rob Monteau, I'm from the RICTO. I run the HMIF portion of pulling this together as an operational prototype. Working with the commandants and MCOE, MCDID, and the programmer record, our role at RICTO is developing that operational prototype to deliver that and issue that to an operational force so the Army could learn from that. That's RICTO's role is to get that capability out so the Army can continue learning from it as operational units are able to use it. We want to be able to inform the Army overall with this prototype as just a baseline. We want to be able to build on top of that to enhance those capabilities in the future, as you heard the commandants talking about, and advancing it for additional capabilities and bringing overwhelming effect for those operational forces. Right now, we're pulling together capabilities that are being worked within S&T industry to integrate it together and to deliver that first 2 platoon sets. And and in doing so, we want to standardize the architecture, standardize interfaces, so we can leverage, we're here at AUSA with all these great capabilities that industry is showcasing, to be able to build on top of that baseline with new sensors, new autonomy, new effects as we go forward. So it's really standardizing that so we could increase capabilities year over year. And then, then lastly is as we increase that capability, as my boss, Lieutenant General Rash, says, it's kind of the robot math. The 1 + 1 equals 3 for an added capability, but we reduce that cognitive burden, as you heard, to not allow the increased capability to overwhelm the warfighter. So when we're thinking of that, we're reducing that cognitive burden of where you then have 1 + 1 1.1, so we don't have that complexity within that formation. And then again, just wrapping it up, our role is again putting it out as an issued kit, so that the Army could learn from it, from not just the material aspects, it's all the other .mil PFP aspects of it, and advancing all those ilities, so we could bring that forward as part of this first unit that we issue.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. For the next question, we'll go to Colonel Ken Bernier. How frequent do you see the capabilities in HMI formations evolving and updating?
So, great question. Ken Bernier, Future Battle Platforms. I have Booker, RCV, and soon to be SMET. And the answer to that is, if we look at the foundations of how we're setting up RCV, which is the universal skateboard where we can plug in capabilities that become available. So allow us to enable the vision that the armor and infantry formations have. How do we, as technology is available, plug it in and quickly enable the evolution of that? So we see this being completely technology driven after we build the base platforms.
Thanks, Ken. All right, for the next question, we'll go to Colonel Scott Shaw. What additional capabilities does the maneuver community feel will be critical to incorporate in the 5, 10, 15-year time horizon after HMI formations are first fielded?
So first, common controller to common control. And common controller means just that. I mean, a common controller so that you can control multiple types of robots, whether they're air or ground, on the same piece of hardware. It needs to be simple. It's got to be handed off from one soldier to the other like you'd do a clacker for a claymore. It can't be something that's complex, whether that's TAC-based or not. We're still working on it. But that's got to lead to common control so that there are multiple controllers that are different, that are worked by software. The second one is we got to go from 2 to 1 or 1 to 1 to 1 to many. And I mean 1 to 2, 1 to 4, and 1 to 10. In that ratio, I mean humans to robots. Right now, we're 2 to 1 in some places. We're getting good at getting closer to 1 to 1, but we need to be at 1 to 4, 1 to 6, 1 to 10, 1 to many. Both of those capabilities will lead from where we're at now, robotic and autonomous systems, to robotic-enabled maneuver, which is where we need to be. And instead of just platoons that are specialty platoons, like an AT platoon or a mortar platoon or a scout platoon, where you've got robotic-enabled formations, robotic-enabled battalions that are able to do what a BCT commander needs to do as part of the joint force.
Thanks, Scott. So we've kind of heard from the majority of the team at this point, and I'm going to bring it back to the Infantry and Armor Commandant, and General Kinnery, I'm going to let you go first on this one. But how are these efforts coming together to make infantry and armor formations better able to shoot, move, communicate, and then kind of what challenges and opportunities do you foresee as we're going forward?
Yeah, so I think that the answer to that question is what's represented on the stage. The collaboration that's happening right now, the meetings that we have, the communication that we have all the way across the entire .mil PF. Everybody from the equipping folks to those that are writing the doctrine and implementing it inside the training, aligning formations to be correct, as well as assigning the tasks that we're looking for inside of both the armor and the infantry formation. So, where's the conflict? I haven't seen it yet, right? The conflict really becomes in the great idea community, right? And how we're actually driving the ideas and making sure that the concept actually gets down to the formation so that the formation is actually executing that concept correctly so that we can get real feedback, real-time feedback from one of the tick formations or however we're going to implement the HMI RAS tunes or wherever we employ or field the robots. So it's about that timely feedback in order to make sure that, one, they're utilizing the robots or the machines in order to actually get the effect we're looking for, or that feedback's actually coming up. So we're continuing to refine that, but it takes the entire family up here to do it.
Yeah, I think it is a big family. And look, I guess one of the things I'd stress is that this is not just a material problem. There's a reason why we're all up here on the stage together. And I'll just give you an example of how it's not just about the M. So Charlie 17 Cav, a cavalry troop, had the mission under Kevin's team to pilot the ground KENS RCV, and they employed a platoon construct. This is back in July at NTC. They were attached to the OP4. They did mostly reconnaissance and security missions, and it was moderate success. I think we learned a ton, and if it's a question of what we learned, it was a huge success. We actually took that feedback. The way the platoon was organized was with 2 control vehicles and 4 robots. And what we learned, Phil talked about cognitive band load, task saturation. What we learned is we actually needed a 3rd control vehicle for that platoon to operate effectively and to operate across different nets and to communicate not just amongst the platoon, but up and out to the company commander. And so in a pretty quick turn, with this team here up on the stage, we redesigned the organization, and it's now, at least the going concern is probably 3 control vehicles as we look to expand autonomy. And we gave it a whirl at the most recent NTC rotation. Same troop, Charlie 17 Cav, this time with 2nd Brigade 1st ID, and another time to try and learn and experiment to get this formation to work and deliver the capability that we want. So that's an example of the team coming together, not just focused on the end, but organizational solution. And I could talk about how we're going to train these formations. I could talk about how we need to write doctrine for these formations, what the impact is going to be in terms of how do we develop our junior leaders, our officers and non-commissioned officers. There's a lot that goes into this that certainly springs from the M, but it's this team up here that at least we're trying to make our way on it.
Gentlemen, thank you. For Ken Bernier, got a 2-part question for you, which I think the audience is definitely interested to hear about. The first part of the question is really, when can we expect to see the SMET and RCV on the ground with soldiers in use? And then the second part is, can you talk about how the software pathway is different for this HMIF effort?
So let's hit the first question. So though we won't be delivering capability until later, because we're in the process of a down select competition right now, and when we're going to field the full capability, which is not until 28. But will happen between now and then is we will continue to do soldier touch points as we refine subsystems such as the controllers and other systems, and then we'll go and do a full operational test where we're going to give them the systems and we're going to continue to learn and evolve. And learning and evolving is really where I switched to the software pathway. RCV was the first program in the Armory to separate software from the hardware. Monumental effort. We were very, very good at writing contracts for having vendors provide us an end-to-end solution, which worked for a long time. But what it proved was it was not adaptable for where we want to see it to go in the future. We see a future where we need to be able to adjust quickly. And to do that is we need to have a much more say and control on the subsystem level, especially with software. Because ultimately what we see is software is potentially the future for robots. Because the things that we brought up here, common control. Common control is a software problem. It's not a hardware problem. There's lots of hardware controllers that can control it. But the software to make it all work And so for us to deliberately do that enables us to have a future where we can do those changes. As new technology happens, as new problem sets are solved, we can quickly propagate that to the force. And that's why we've done that.
Great, thank you. All right, for the last question for the panel from me before I open it up to the audience, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit with Scott's comment about common control. So first I'm going to pass this one to Rob and then to Scott to finish it off. But what have we not seen that industry can help us with in this effort?
That's a great question, especially here at AUSA. I think we just haven't tapped into industry's full potential. I think that's what we haven't seen. So having us have the ability to allow industry to iterate with us, put new capabilities onto the platforms, bring other platforms into the architecture, I think that's the biggest piece. And we'll be delivering those architectures and interfaces, and a plug for AFC's HMI Summit 4 coming up in November. We'll be putting out those initial architectures and interfaces, so industry can build to that and help us iterate. So I think that's the biggest thing. We just haven't tapped into industry's full potential here across HMI.
So specifically, true mobility and true survivability. And I'll give you definitions of both of them. So true mobility, I need a robot to be able to go through sand, the Kahukus, South Pacific Island kind of jungle, into a tunnel, and that's a physical deal, but also the comms that go into a tunnel. Like, you're going to have something that drops, repeaters or whatever. So true mobility is the first one. True survivability is the second, in my opinion. And that means a robot that's not going to get knocked out by the first gunshot. And right now there are a lot of them, and I'm not trying to denigrate anybody's product out here, but it's not going to take a 50 round, and it's probably not going to take a 5.56 round. So those are the two things that I'm looking for as I walk around, looking at vendors, as I look at things on the internet or wherever doing research with Ken and Rob, is true survivability of something that's going to do dirty, dull, and dangerous.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Now that the panel is fully warmed up, I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. You can direct it at an individual panel member or collectively to the group that's up here. Sir, go ahead.
Former President Carter just turned 100. One of the reasons why he wasn't reelected was the disastrous hostage rescue mission with not enough helicopters. My question is, with men or with machine, can we find the hostages that are now being held by Hamas?
My answer is I don't know. That's well beyond my level of expertise. I'm not afraid to profess my ignorance in a public forum, but I don't really have an answer to your question. I'm sorry.
Sir, let me follow up on that one. So, with the robots that we have right now, they can't go in tunnels deep. I mean, they can go into tunnels, but at some point, some of the robots that we've got can't go to one of the vendors over to this side. And that's what I'm saying about true mobility and true survivability. It's not just tracks or legs, but I need a network, and I need something to connect me to it. Or it's not helpful when there's a robot that has a 1K range before it stops, like an RC car when I was a kid. So to answer your question specifically, no.
But I do think there is space for robots to help us with that problem in the future, right?
Absolutely.
And as we think about the progression and the capability that we want to fight with in the future, we want them to be able to offload that risk from humans, to be able to send robots to try and solve that problem, find hostages in hard-to-reach places in urban areas, and that's the progression that has to occur over time. So, sir, thank you for that question. A great question. Next.
Hey, Sam Scove, Defense One. So, I mean, in Ukraine right now, we see both sides actually using combat robots every day. Obviously, it's a developing situation. It's not necessarily part of big programs. But I was wondering what lessons you're taking as you see, video of those combat interactions, and sort of how you assess our progress which is more deliberate against the sort of ad hoc approach they're taking? Thanks.
Maybe I'll start off. I'll say what I'm learning watching that is what I believe we're seeing between the Russians and the Ukrainian are the constant cycle of adaptation that occurs in combat. That cycle of adaptation is occurring now. It occurred during World War II and World War I. I think Colonel Bradley talked about that. That adaptation has been a feature of combat since we were throwing sticks and stones at each other. The question is what do we do with that information, and where does the adaptation occur? And this is why I think Ken Bernier's point about software and the points about payload development, modular open system architecture, these are all features of a system that are going to integrate robots with humans. And we've, just like it occurs anywhere in combat, we've got to be fast in the adaptation. And that's why I believe that as much as we will continue to invest in the chassis that moves the capability around, equally important is the development of the payloads that are going to deliver overwatch and suppression and even more as the technology matures.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that, sir. And the iteration, I think, is the key lesson learned there, and not 100% solution. Get something out that's 60% and iterate on it, and cheap and fast, and keep on building on top of that. I think that is a lesson that we're all learning from those uses of robotics.
Hey, Sam, I appreciate your reporting on Ukraine. I thought your article 2 weeks ago was pretty awesome. So just so you know what the C did, I've got an OE branch that studies it pretty regularly, that is looking at open source, is looking at things on classified systems, and we discuss it about once or twice a month as a group across the entire CDID, so all 10 directors and me, with like everybody I senior rate, sit in a room, we sit there and talk about it. We had a 1-on-5 with the DevCom guy last week in Ukraine to talk about what they're learning there. I do talk to General Buzzard a good bit as well, and the G2 section at Fort Moore talks to both commandants about once a week about the same thing. So we're studying it pretty tight. That's not the only thing we're studying there. We're looking at things in the Pacific as well to make sure that we're covering down on what we need to do in that transformation and contact window that General Ryan just talked about, to make sure that gets us into deliberate transformation and then into concept-based transformation. I'd love to talk about it later if you'd like.
Yeah, I think it was a great question, and I think collectively from the group, it's one of the inputs that is helping inform our efforts that we take into consideration, the lessons, marrying that with our own experimentation, what we're seeing at the CTCs, what we're seeing out in Hawaii with the transformation and contact units that were just up here on the stage. I think all of those inputs, bringing those together and comparing those lessons is really what's helping drive some of our formation designs, as well as the what equipment and payloads that we're looking for in the future. But thank you for that question. Sir.
Thank you. John Harper with Defense Scoop. You talked about having, one human controller operating up to, 10 robotic combat vehicles, for example. What are your biggest challenges now from a technology perspective in terms of making those vehicles more autonomous, where you can, achieve that vision? And also, how do you envision addressing electronic warfare threats in terms of preventing adversaries from disrupting communications between human controllers and the robotic combat vehicles, and ensuring that those can continue to operate in an intense EW environment?
Yeah, great question.
So I'll take the first part and I'll let Rob talk. He's much better when it talks about EW. But so first challenge we have to overcome is robust autonomy. Robust autonomy for maneuver. And they, the commandants can explain like maneuver, because it's more than just a car driving down a road. It is, once you move off the road, it is a very chaotic place to be overcome. And we have been working through PMRCV. We made multiple investments over the last few years. We're having an upcoming industry day where we want to be able to say, hey, this is the path to get on the platform. to help realizing the vision of that simplify and control. Because right now, it just doesn't do everything we want. It does do some things, just not everything. So it doesn't allow that paradigm for that one-to-one all the time control. There's one-to-one sometimes, but not all the time. So until we get there, we just got to work with what we got.
As far as the EW effects on the robotic systems, we just need them to be adaptable from the aspect of having multiple different paths, now allowing them to understand what that environment is, and then having them make the decisions on how they communicate with each other and being able to communicate back to the control. So just having multiple paths will help us there to help address some of those environments. And then obviously looking at it from the other lens and red teaming it to make sure that that we're addressing anything that's new and emerging, and having an architecture that's modular, be able to enhance that and iterate over it as the conditions change.
Hi, Meredith Roden from Janes. Could you say a little bit more about your thinking and the lessons learned that resulted in deciding to do 3 control vehicles per platoon, and also how the RCV platform approach differs from the RICTO approach to the control vehicle?
So I'll let Rob talk about the RICTO. I mean, my sense is we're complementary. We're firing on the same target, and he's working on a faster cycle to inform our efforts. In terms of how we organize this human-machine integrated formation, right now the current idea is it should be a platoon with a platoon leader, with a platoon sergeant. And so there are practical realities, and there's a lot going inside a control vehicle when essentially 2 crews in one control vehicle are trying to control 4 robots. Scott talked about the current, we're 2-to-1, 2 humans to control 1 robot. That means you need to have a section leader telling a gunner and a driver what to do with the robot. That section leader needs to talk to his platoon leader, platoon sergeant, and that platoon leader, platoon sergeant needs to talk to the company commander, and all that talking is occurring inside one vehicle. And so we took a look at that and we said, well, we need to decomplexify this a little bit and give another control vehicle that extends potentially command and control, that reduces the cognitive bandwidth. And this is not a done deal. We're going to have the opportunity to iterate these in our formations, and so hopefully that answers the question. There was a lot going inside the turret of that vehicle, and taking a leader out and having the formation look like other mechanized platoons, whether it's an armor platoon, a tank platoon, or a mech platoon, seemed to make a lot of sense to the warfighter.
And then from a control vehicle design, there is no difference. Actually, Rob and I's team is co-located where we have all the best folks working on it. So right now, there is only one solution from what it looks like inside the control vehicle. Now, in the future, as we evolve and the RICTO effort goes somewhere else, we will continue to work on it to optimize the solution. But the initial solution is the exact same.
Thank you. Sir?
Am I on? What do you see as the role of non-traditional defense contractors in development of HMIF?
So I think that's a great question, and that's getting back to the architectures and interfaces that we're going to be establishing as part of this first increment, and looking for new and novel capabilities. Either they're in the software space or in the hardware space for sensors, effectors, whatever it is, to align to the capabilities that the commandants and the MC did are laying out for these future enhancements to HMI. So we are absolutely looking across industry to bring their best capabilities. Like I mentioned, I think we just haven't seen what industry you can really bring to bear in an architecture that's open and we can plug new things into it.
And then if I was to pile on that from a software perspective, the software will never be good enough. We will always continue to make it better. And there are problems we haven't even contemplated yet to make it so that the warfighter can overcome it. And we will look, that's why we're doing its own pathway, because we can continue to solve smaller problems with non-traditionals and other methods we have to deliver modular-based, smaller increments of software and then continue to make it better over time. It's never done.
I'd say the same thing to academia. So, if you're an academia professional working at a university and you've got some robot idea, physical or in your head, we want to hear it because we don't have all the good ideas. So I spent some time in universities over the last 6, 8, 10 months talking to academia about what it is that they're working on, and it's influenced our thinking at the maneuver seated for sure.
Yeah, and I think coming back to a comment, and I'll hit this again at the end, but Army Futures Command is hosting a summit on 6 and 7 November at Texas A&M University, and really where we're going to explain where we're kind of at in the different aspects of human-machine integrated formations. Things that will be talked about there is the common rail. So the idea of, if you look at a current rifle, it has a common rail on the top, so you can put any type of attachment, and anyone from industry with a good idea can build towards that common attachment. We see the same thing on top of both the RCV and the SMET having a common rail, so that if you have a great payload that helps us get after suppression or overwatch, that it can be easily integrated into the platform and plug in there. I think the two other spaces where we're absolutely looking for great ideas and help is on autonomy. We know in order to get from 2 to 1 to 1 to 4, those there are certain tasks that have to be autonomous with the robotic combat vehicles and the payloads in order to get that math to work. And so looking for efforts in that is very helpful. And I think the last one I talked about is helping us optimize the bandwidth and spectrum use. When you talk about control, pushing 4K video to be able to make decisions back to the operators, and then being able to control the robots, that takes a lot of bandwidth. It takes a lot of spectrum to be able to do that, but unique ways to optimize that to get after the EW conversation and being able to extend the distance is another area we're looking for critical help from industry as well. Sir.
This will be our last question for today.
Thanks. Was going to see a connection to the sustainment warfighting function. Where do you see autonomy into sustainment? The dependencies for sustainment for World War II, using your analogy, and I think you just addressed, sir, a lot of the how do you make autonomy that's less brittle in terms of sustainment requirements? Oh.
So let's start with one. And we've been working a lot in the Army with this, is when we need a really good, better common lexicon. Because when I use autonomy and my sustainment brethrens use autonomy, it doesn't mean the same thing. So we've been working really closely, and if you don't know Dr. Sadowski, he's got the lead on that, because we need to start articulating our problems in a way that we're consistent across the Army. Because transporting stuff in a road environment versus combat maneuver, very different. But there's some gives and takes where you can do that. So I think that's where we owe industry, and actually we're going to be working on that in the near term to be able to lay that out. So we're all speaking in the same language, so it doesn't matter who it is, so that we can truly articulate that and solve that problem together.
I think the other aspect that I would talk in that is when we look at sustainment, we view HMIF formations as really part of the solution to reducing the sustainment burden on our brigade combat teams, right? And so whether that's helping us with transport, but the solutions we propose can't increase that problem set. And so I think as we look at it, we're very attuned to the fact that our solutions need to reduce the overall formation sustainment burden as opposed to increasing it with additional payloads and the choices we're making of how to organize the formation.
Yeah, I would. I'd just double down on that. I mean, there's not a battalion or brigade commander in our Army, I don't care if it's an ABCT, IBCT, or SBCT, that doesn't want to be able to extend his or her tactical reach. And sometimes that's fuel, sometimes that's water, a lot of times that's ammunition. And I think we need to be clear-eyed about where the technology is in terms of our ability to move commodities in an autonomous fashion across the battlefield. My sense of this is that, between the battalion field trains in the brigade support area up to the battalion combat trains, right, that's pretty complex. But when you start to talk about battalion combat trains to company trains and doing emergency resupply in contact, closer to the forward lines of troop, in terrain that's much more complex, that's a whole different ball game. And so I think that autonomous sustainment is something that is accompanying this effort. And we just got to be clear-eyed about the challenges for those tasks. Go ahead.
No, the only thing I'd add is obviously, as they talked about the difference there, is the sustainment of those robotic platforms, being able to resupply them and other things. Those are probably areas that we'll definitely look at.
I just want to say, I know we're a minute over time. Thank you very much for the great questions, for sticking around to talk to us about this important effort. And I would once again hit 6 to 7 November, Texas A&M University, AFC's HMI Summit. If you haven't gotten an invite or looking for more information, there's some great Americans at the AFC booth behind me who can steer you in the right direction to sign up. But thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll hang out up here if there's additional questions.